Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome to Dev Interrupted. I'm your host, Dan Lyons, and today I'm joined by Rouan Wilsenach, a software engineer and technical leader. Rouan, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
Awesome to have you here. I know you have a proven track record of helping build outstanding engineering teams, making amazing products. You've worked in tech stacks for companies in the financial services, education, leisure, and energy sectors. So, like a bunch of different types of businesses. But it was actually your passion for writing. You wrote something really freaking cool that caught my personal attention. You published an article on Martin Fowler's website titled Ship Show Ask, a Modern Branching Strategy. And man, yeah, I'm totally a fan of that. I don't read too many things and actually get excited about them. This I read and I was like, I gotta reach out to this guy. This is really cool. And it's a really cool take on how teams, could be working. And also it's a little passion of mine and the work that we're doing at LinearB. So I wanted to first say thank you for the inspiration and getting out there and writing.
Sure, it's a pleasure. I like it. So
Are you writing a bunch of stuff or is it just this one or you're doing a bunch of written stuff too?
yeah, I try to write whenever I can. So I find that it's something that I like doing, and I've written for a few different places in the past. And for me, writing is a good way of writing of getting stuff down that people ask you all the time. So I feel like if I'm explaining something to different people multiple times, then writing an article is a good way of summing it up and having something to point to.
Yeah, it's a great point. I always try to make a point to say this to developers or engineering leaders out there. Don't be afraid to write stuff down, put it out there. And you gave a good tip. If you are hearing people ask you the same stuff over and over again, it probably means that there's thousands of people thinking the same thing. So get your stuff out there. And to kind of kick us off, where we're going to go with this pod, we're going to start with, I love these titles that, our producers write for us. The Road to Ship Show Ask. So let's define Ship Show Ask. Can you give us a quick overview of what this is?
Yeah, sure. So basically, Ship Show Ask is, I called it a modern branching strategy. Maybe that's just me grabbing attention. I don't know. But I think essentially what it is it's me trying to describe a middle ground between or maybe a spectrum rather than a middle ground between your classic continuous integration and what we see at lots of organizations today, which is a workflow that's heavy in pull requests with lots of branching and lots of stopping points. And I think that we're at a point now where we can look at the way that we develop software and we can figure out where in the spectrum we are for every particular change that we're making and make the responsible choice. And we should trust people to do that.
Yeah, that's very, very cool. And actually, at LinearB, we have the luxury, like the company that I'm at, we get to look and inspect workflows. That's one of the things that we're doing metrics. Where is code getting stuck? And you're totally right. Most of our data, like 90% of the companies out there, where it's getting stuck is actually in that pull request process. Because most companies are in a situation where every single change is going through a PR process, at least one review or that type of thing. And it's certainly a problem for the development community, which is why your stuff caught my eye. Now, for you, what I wanted to ask you is, was there some type of inspiration that made you write the article? Was it a bunch of people asking you the same thing, or like what actually inspired you to get it out there?
So in this particular case, it was all about how we were working in a team that I was in. And so for me, I come from a background of early on in my career, I worked with a company called ThoughtWorks for about 4 years. And there it was all about test-driven development, trunk-based development. So that's kind of where my development chops were in. And you commit to the main line all the time. There was no branching. Like, branching was a dirty word. And then I joined a different company after that, and pull requests were the way that things were done. And it was interesting to me because it was a bit of a shock to my system. But I also came to see that there were interesting and good things about short-lived feature branches and pull requests. The primary two being one, that it lets you have conversations right next to the code when you can't actually sit next to the person. And so this company that I was working for was completely remote. And so for remote teams, it's a really great way of kind of sitting in front of the code together. But you can sit in front of the code together at a different time and in a different place. So it's that asynchronous benefit. And that the second benefit is that the pull requests are a little bit more inclusive as a process because of that. So you can work with people in different time zones, people who have family commitments. And so I was drawn to those advantages. And so when I was running a team at this other company, I had a distributed, fully remote team. So we had people in Singapore, we had people in Canada, and people all over in between. And the pull requests were a really helpful way of us all being able to work together. But I didn't like the idea that pull requests had to be a stopping point for the productivity. Like, I've opened a pull request and I'm going to wait for someone else to wake up on the other side of the world, and then my change will get merged. And so over time, we developed, I used to just call them the rules of thumb for pull requests, something like that. And I didn't have the name ship show ask until I started writing the article. But it was basically, if you wanted to make a change that you were confident about and you just wanted to just make it on the main line straight away. If you wanted to make a change and show it to someone else, open a pull request and merge it yourself straight away. Or thirdly, if you wanted to get someone's input, open the pull request and ask for a review. And so that's kind of how we got there.
Yeah, totally. I assume you were probably at ThoughtWorks pre-pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. It was all
you were all together.
Consulting. Yeah.
Yeah. But, the way most of the world works now is a remote style. And so, the Ship Show S, let's actually break down Ship Show and S just so our audience understands like each one, and then we can get, back into it a little bit. So when you think about ship, what does that mean?
Sure. So this is the closest you're going to get to what people call continuous integration or trunk-based development. I'm going to make a change. I'm going to make it on master. I'm going to get it shipped. So there are lots of examples where this would work well. And what will work well will depend on the team as well. So almost certainly if I'm changing some documentation or I'm changing my linting rules or something like that, put it on master, get it shipped. It's fine. Or maybe linting rules is a bad example. That might be something that we want to have more of a conversation around. Maybe I'm running prettier on a file that didn't have prettier on it, and I ship that. In some teams, you might have been working together for a while. You have established patterns of working. You get along well. You have high trust. And so maybe you're just making another widget like all the other widgets that we've made. And so it's not a big deal. You put it on the main line straight away.
Yeah.
And when you work on the main line like this, you use all of those continuous integration techniques. You use, feature flags. You build the back end before you build the front end. You add new things before you go and delete the old ones. All of those ways of making changes safely. And you just do it straight on your main branch.
Totally makes sense to me. And, before you brought up a good point when you were working at, the company that was more in the remote style, you're making these changes, you go to sleep at night, you wake up the next day, you're probably hoping, okay, I got approval for this. I need to move forward. You might see that you didn't get approval. You got to ping someone. The average is like 4 to 5 days. That's actually what the data says when you think about all the companies in the world, and there's different maturity levels. But yeah, I love the ship situation. It's behind the feature flag, so it's not going to, impact prod, let's say. Maybe and I think you use the terminology unremarkable change. Maybe it's a documentation only change, test only change. Maybe there's a schema configuration update that's not going to break anything. Let's get that code in. Let's not wait. So yeah, that's probably out of the three, that's my favorite one as of now. But let's move on to the next one with this. So that was ship. Then what does show mean?
I think maybe let's do it in a slightly different order. Let's talk about ask first, because it presents the opposite end of the spectrum. And so the ask mode is basically, I stop and wait every time I make a change. So I open a pull request for every change set that I have, and I ask folks to review it for me. And in some companies, this includes having a review process, like a set number of people who need to approve it, or a set of code owners that have to have a look at it. And that's great from the point of view of you make sure that your change is okay because you're getting the input and you're getting the discussion on what needs to happen. So that's ask.
This is how most companies are working. Everything's an ask. To be honest, that's what I see. Everything's an ask, at least one, reviewer. And I've been talking not just to you, but to other developers about this. And one thing that was interesting to me is there's a little bit of a false sense of security with the ask. Now, I'll tell you why. If I'm asking you to review every single one of my changes, whether it's a high risk change, a low risk change, unremarkable change, something in the middle, you'll actually get fatigue. You'll start seeing people, put onto the pull request LGTM. That's what you say, or at least in the US, like looks good to me. Or, you might be, there's a situation behind the scenes on Slack. Hey man, I just put up this PR, but can you push approve? It's totally good. Yeah, okay, LG. So you actually get like a fatigue of the review because you're not really needed every single time, and quality can actually dip and a little burnout can happen. So I found that interesting when I started talking to people about it.
Absolutely. I think it's interesting because whenever we talk about branching strategies, that sounds kind of dry, but what we're actually talking about is two things. We're talking about trust and we're talking about safety. And it's interesting because people seem to think that trust and safety pull in opposite directions. And so I think that for a lot of companies, the temptation, like you said, it's a false sense of security, but the temptation is there to say, I don't trust that the changes are going to be good. And so I'm going to introduce a process to provide me with that safety that I require. And that being the required approval. And the problem is that it doesn't scale. That's what I've seen. Even at small companies, it just doesn't scale because here's the thing, right? You require a decent amount of context to do a good review of a pull request. And in addition to that, you also need to be quite good at opening pull requests in order to get yourself a good review.
That's interesting.
We just don't have enough time for that. And so we're at the point at which we're asking of that. If we're asking for that for every single change, you're either going to pile up pull requests so high that you're never going to get to all of them, or people are just going to go, yeah, that's fine. And then you don't actually have pull request reviews at all.
Yeah. And I think like from the data perspective, it kind of goes in waves. This is what I can see. It piles up. Then people are like, what the hell's going on? Then it comes down really sharply without maybe the best review possible.
Sure.
And actually, while you were talking, I was thinking about some like human nature and philosophical things. I'll run a few of them by you
Sure.
to see if any of these resonate. It's like saying, hey, to reduce the crime rate. This was like I was watching a documentary about LA in the 80s. To reduce the crime rate, let's add more police officers. And when more police officers were added, did the crime rate decrease? The answer is no. The crime rate did not decrease. What actually decreased the crime rate was like education of children and knowledge and being having more expertise. And then there's less. It's actually similar thing with pull requests. Let's add more gates to improve quality. It doesn't work. What actually works is, trust your developer, educate developers. I think, all the testing stuff totally does help and work, but it's like, hey, if you trust your developers, they're highly educated, they're empowered, you have the safety net of tests, let's get more stuff through. So that's what came to mind to me when you were saying that, the crime rate stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That makes complete sense. And then the education element is really important because, there are some techniques that you need to know as an engineer, which help you make changes safely. And, tests are one of them. Knowing how to make changes on the mainline safely, I mentioned a few earlier. Those are really helpful for just having a bit more confidence in your changes, which is kind of what, sorry. I was going to say, which is kind of what we're looking for with having these approvals, right? That's what people are after. They want confidence.
You're right. The other thing that came to mind to me is like speed and quality. The old school mentality, let's say 30 years ago, but even like companies work like this today. Old school mentality is like, if we move slower, with a lot of gates, quality will increase. And maybe that was true like 50 or 30 years ago, whenever computer, but what we found out, lots of studies now show when you move faster, it's like riding a bicycle. So as you actually move faster, you get more stability because your
Yeah,
changes are getting in quicker and there's not as bigger, these huge PRs and so on. And so we could probably talk about the ask portion of this all day.
sure.
Yeah, less ask, more ship, I think. Or it's really it's yeah, it's a two extremes. It's really a balance. Honestly, that's what I've come to here.
Absolutely. And
Um,
I guess that's where show comes in. And that's the thing that I noticed no one was doing. And we tried it and it worked really well. And the thing was just don't wait for approval, merge your own pull request, but still open a pull request so that you can get the feedback that you need. So this was great for a number of scenarios, right? Like the one scenario is I've made a change. I'm pretty confident. I wouldn't mind it if someone had a look. Or I've made a change and I think it might be beneficial for other people to have a look. Like I've refactored some code that used to be a kind of a mess and I fixed it. Look how it looks now. Or I've shipped a feature and I feel like I would, maybe this could be better. Like, are there any things that we could refactor? Or maybe just I've written some code. It's a new feature. I'd like you all to see how I approach this.
yeah.
And it opens up the conversation without stopping the development flow.
So if we reiterate the concept of show, it's I'm moving forward with the change. All of this is around change acceptance. That's actually
Yeah,
what we're talking. How does a team accept code changes? Kind of like socially, really, is what it is. How do we accept it into the project? The show is saying something like, and correct me if I'm wrong, but I think it's saying, I'm moving forward with this change. I'm moving it through. But I think that there's a value if someone can take a look at it. Now, there could be value in knowledge sharing. That's one actually situation where I think pull requests are great. Get a lot of knowledge sharing. You can get coaching. You can get feedback. You could have a junior review your code. You could see, so it's like knowledge sharing. And I was trying to think of more show examples, but another thing that came to mind to me is like, I don't think that this is a breaking change by any means, but I question maybe the efficiency of it. Or maybe
yeah.
I could have done it better. Or maybe I could have done it in a more consumable way. What does everybody think? Is that the way that you perceive it, or am I off there?
Yeah. No, that's exactly it. Totally. And when you're asking other people to look at it, there are changes that you can make where you still want some expert input, but you don't have to have it in order to ship the change. So, maybe you're, I don't know, what's a good example, but maybe you've just written a new database query and you feel like you haven't quite written as concise a query as you could have. And there's someone on your team who would have a look and say, well, you don't need this bit, but you know that it works.
Yeah.
So you can get the feature in the hands of your users and then have the conversation afterwards.
Yeah. I love that. Because I mean, you got the two ends of the spectrum, like the ask, there's great situations where you need an ask. And I think there's really obvious situations where you can use the ship. The show is somewhere in the middle. So I've been like thinking more and more and more about that. Now, let's talk about how to actually, let's say that, you're an audience listener and this makes sense to you. Yeah, ship show ask. Like, let's not block every single change. Let's have better quality, but move with efficiency, trust our developers. Developer experience is a super big topic right now. Let's give them a good experience. Let's not bottleneck. What about implementation of this? I think you might have some rules to implement this type of process or something like that to get started.
Yeah. I printed out some stuff because I knew I wasn't going to remember this, but I did write
Yeah,
down some rules. What were they? The one is that you can't tick the box that says required approval on GitHub or Bitbucket or wherever you're coding. Like the requires one approver, you don't get to tick that box. And for someone who's listening, who's in the habit of having to have every pull request approved, that might sound quite uncomfortable to you. And I think that there are two things that I want to say to that. The one thing is that, like we said, we're actually talking about trust here. And if the reason that you're feeling nervous about not checking that box is because you don't trust that the right thing is going to happen, then we should fix the trust issues, because there's no branching strategy. There's no tooling in the world that's going to fix your cultural issues.
Right.
And so if you have trust issues, that the way to fix that is to talk to people and, have conversations about what's important and spend time coding together, sharing knowledge. All of that kind of good stuff has to happen in order for you to be able to trust people. And I don't think that's a prerequisite for starting to think about branching strategies in this way, but certainly it's a journey that needs to happen alongside it. And then
Well,
again,
just even
yeah,
right
go for it.
there, honestly, to jump in, it makes sense to me because the branching strategy, which is like the technical way to kind of talk about it, again, it's really an agreement of the team of how do we want to work together? How do we accept changes into this project that we're all responsible for?
Yeah.
So when I'm thinking about, ship, and I've had the advantage. I've been starting to. We have a bunch of customers at LinearB actually that are implementing something close to this, and it's usually a conversation about the rules.
Yeah.
What is the situations where a ship makes sense? What are the situations where an ask makes sense? What are that's the human conversation that happens. And then we can codify these rules. I mean, we can program the rules. There's things that we can do. It's actually like a project that we're working on at LinearB. It's called gitStream. And it's similar to what you're saying here, but that's about codifying these rules. But the real thing is the conversation with the team
Yeah, absolutely.
to agree on what they are. I think that's where you were going.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense.
Uh,
And I was going to say the other thing that's worth pointing out is if they're not checking the approval required box is scary. Think about all those pull requests that don't get reviewed and all the pull requests kind of back up. Show is like a release valve, right? Every time someone doesn't ask for a review, it's one fewer pull request that doesn't need it to get reviewed. And you're going to get
yeah,
time to get better quality reviews on the pull requests that need them.
I love that. I mean, another way to think about it is every time you're asking for a review, you're taking time away from at least two people. So it's going to be yourself and
Yeah.
the reviewer. And that's where we see the bottleneck is going back and forth, right? I'm asking you, you're going away from the work that you're trying to deliver. So you're getting like a context switch. You're looking at the code. Now, are you going to do a serious review or not? Or are you going to give me an LGTM? That's debatable.
Yeah.
Let's see that you give me like a real review. And okay, that might happen even if it's an LGTM. Like I'm taking time away from you. That's my point.
Yeah.
And so what I really like about it in the rules, it's around optionality. I think that's what development teams need. And that's one thing we're trying to do at LinearB is let's give developers optionality because not every code change is created equal. It's not the same.
Yeah.
And if you give that optionality to the development team, okay, now I can choose like which lane I'm in. Am I in a ship situation, a show, or an ask? Like I think that actually that's what it is. Optionality is what's great here.
Yeah. Because we trust the people that we pay to do software engineering to make that call. And if we don't trust them, then we need to fix that, not the process.
And we pay them a lot. These are very smart people making, in terms of like the entire world, really good
Yeah,
money. They're smart.
absolutely.
And it goes like developer experience. You're in South Africa, so it's
Yep.
actually nighttime but like I know for sure in the U.S. developer experience is like totally a thing now. So it's the thing around that is like how do we allow developers to work in this creative environment and essentially get their code merged or get their code out to production. And companies that aren't valuing that, we're having a lot of burnout. So
Yeah.
it's a situation of like, if every single code change, no matter the impact of it, is taking at least two people, the reviewer, to get merged or how, whatever your branching strategy is, that's like a bad experience. That sucks. Yeah, there's no other way to say it. You wrote the blog on this. What was the reception to this idea?
So it's really interesting because there are three reactions that I've experienced. The one is, this is a good idea. I like the fact that we're not trying to put things into boxes and that we can see that things will be different for different teams and things will be different for different code changes. So that's the "we agree with you" response. And then there are actually two disagreements you get. So the one disagreement you get is from the trunk-based development crowd who say, "No branches. What are you talking about? Pull requests are evil, and we want to make all of our changes on the main line." So I've gotten a fair bit of that. And then I've also gotten a fair bit on the other side. Like, how could you possibly make changes safely without getting reviews? Code reviews are important. People who don't think that code reviews are important are not being professional. They're cowboys. So yeah, I've had both.
What would you say to each one of those extreme? You got the trunk-based crew. Not many companies are like that, by the way. But let's say that, from my experience, maybe 10% or something or what.
Yeah.
But what would you say to the trunk-based crew? And then you do have other companies that I'm working with that are actually at the point of 2 reviewers for every single. What would you say
Yeah.
to each side?
So to the trunk-based folks, I would say I would love to sit down with you and do some trunk-based development. That would be that's the dream. That's the best way of coding, really. But that's not really the way that the industry is at the moment. I think for good reason. The reason why the kind of short-lived feature branch pull request model has gained so much traction, I think, is because it offers engineers a level of flexibility. And like you said earlier, right, engineers are in a privileged position of being in high demand, and so get to demand that flexibility to some extent. And I like the idea that we can use that to make the industry a bit more inclusive. And I think that pull requests, obviously, pull requests, if they're in and of themselves, are not going to make the industry more inclusive, but they can help because it enables asynchronous communication. And when we're working remotely, people can take jobs that they wouldn't be able to take otherwise. When you're working asynchronously, people who have other responsibilities like childcare or health requirements, they can work in a way that they wouldn't have been able to before. And so people who are in different time zones can work together. And so I think for people who are deep into the kind of trunk-based development or continuous integration flow, I would say that pull requests can be a really useful tool to widen the net, to get to code with more people. And then to the folks on the ask side, I guess the argument against having all those approvals is that the thing that's important to the person who checks that box requires approval is to feel confident in the changes. And there is like you've said it, right? You've got the data. It doesn't scale. The pull request approval model doesn't scale. And there's no real arguing with that. And so we need to figure out a way of getting back to a place of safety, because that's not the place that we're in right now.
And I think I just got to bring it up again, because the companies that I see that are on the multiple reviewer side, because there are companies that are like two reviewers or whatever it is. Yeah, I think it's a fear thing. We had an incident in production that brought everything down, and we never want to have that happen again. But again, I think it's a false sense of security, because if you're doing that every single time, you're not going to get the best review. And what I say to them is, and again, we have the privilege to have data on this, 25% of your pull requests have an LGTM. Did you know that? They're good.
Yeah.
The other person on the other side literally is not giving any feedback. They're just saying it's good.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think I think where we're at, and I was really happy to bring you on the show today. It's around providing the optionality. That's what I was going to run by you. For us, we are working on this, and we're calling it's a little bit of a you have CI and CD. We're talking about CM, continuous merge. So CM, CI, and CD. That's the term that we're working on getting out there, because we do think it's about, since most companies are using, pull requests out there, continuous merge. What do we do for developers to get code merging in a more continuous way? Of course, using CI and CD too. They all go together. So what we've been doing with companies is actually codifying some of these rules that are similar to ship show ask. Even if you're opening up a pull request every single time, some of them can be auto approved. So yeah, keep your PR process. PRs are good, but let's auto approve. That's kind of like your ship. Okay, it's accepted. You can merge it when you're ready, but it's visible out there. and the tests run against it. And you can still see it and visualize it, and anyone can look. We have a show situation. This was like an interesting one that some of the companies were experimenting with, but we were doing something like, hey, this PR, it's going to be open for 24 hours or for 36 hours. And
Okay.
if I get a comment on it, I would love to respond to it. Maybe I can change. But if no one's saying anything in that amount of time, it's going through because I think it's good. That's kind of like your show. And then we've been, doing things like, and I'm not all just like ship on the other side of it. I do think that there's time when two reviewers are needed. Okay, we're going
Yeah.
to get some of the code auto approved or auto emerged. I'm fine on the other side with high impact changes. Let's get two people on there because I know I'm getting, that's a balanced system. And so I think that's where we're at with a community. We got to make a change.
Yeah, I agree. I think the one thing to be careful of is to rely too heavily on processes to fix kind of endemic cultural problems. So the one thing that I would caution against is that if you have a company, and I think there are a number of these, if you have a company where you're after your next funding round, or you're trying to keep your shareholders happy, or whatever it is that you're trying to chase, you're hiring lots of engineers. Maybe the culture isn't great, so you don't have as good a retention rate as you should have. So you have lots of people working on code. People maybe don't know the code as well as they should, and people don't have enough time to get entrenched into the way that you think that they should be doing software engineering. And so if you're in a situation where you're feeling like that, having the pull request approvals or like the processes, you know, it's a dangerous siren, right? It looks good, but it's not going to be good. And I think what you're describing can be really good, where you're categorizing changes and responding appropriately. But you've got to make sure that you're doing the cultural work alongside it. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck somewhere along the way.
Yeah, it's both in parallel. Actually, the coolest thing with some of the teams that are starting to use gitStream, it means that they're codifying some of these rules that, you're kind of been an influencer on. One of the coolest things that happen is before they make the rules, they have the conversation. So they start it actually makes them all come together and talk. And they do say things like, hey, for these style changes, like let's just say like documentation only, I'll give the easiest one. It's like, I've been pinging you. I just ping you on Slack anyways and say, can you auto approve? Can you just approve this? So it's like that stuff comes out. So they start saying like, okay, that's silly. But also things that come out is like, hey, we have a mono, like in this area, we have a mono repo. It's like
Yeah.
a big repo. And people will say like, I am concerned here because when you make changes, it actually affects a lot. The code is really tangled. There's a lot of dependency. Okay, well, let's describe that. If code is changed in this area of the repo, let's have two reviewers on it. That's great. Now we're having like I think a cultural, to your point, conversation comes up. And that's what's nice to see.
Yeah, it's also good to have the default not always being approving, because I think what you have is like a mono repo is a really good example, or maybe even a better example is a real monolith, like one big chunk of thing.
Yeah,
Or
that's not
even
necessarily saying a monolith. It's really tight.
right,
It's very tightly coupled, basically.
right. And I find with systems like that, you often have very long build times. And if you have to have a pull request and then merge a pull request, you're going to build it twice, right? You're building it once on the branch and then you're building it once on the main line. And if that build is 20 minutes, that's an hour you're waiting just to get your change anywhere near going somewhere.
Yeah, exactly. This has been just like an awesome conversation. As we're coming towards the end of the show, for our listeners, what would be like the one takeaway that you would want, if you could make a statement or two, like what would you want them to take away from this talk?
It's tricky to give one takeaway. I suppose if I was to say that there was one takeaway, it would be that you have to have people thinking and talking about the changes that they're making. So I think it's very difficult to have a blanket rule that works for every team and for every code change. The thing that we want to get better at as engineers is making changes safely. And branching strategy is one component of being able to make changes safely. And so I think as teams, we should all be talking about how do we get to making changes safely. And if a change in your branching strategy comes out of that, then that's great if that's what your team needs. But I think that conversation about how do we make changes safely and still get going, that's the conversation to have.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for coming on the show today. It's been a
Yeah, it's been fun.
pleasure to have you.
Thanks.
And I know that we talked a little bit before the pod started. You're working on something interesting around stand-ups. What's going on there?
Yeah, sure. So a couple of years ago, my team and I, we were getting a little bit bored with having stand up every day. You have the same like Zoom call the same time every day, and it's kind of, what did you do yesterday? And it was getting a bit boring. So we started doing stand up in all kinds of crazy ways. And I put together a website. You can find it at funstandups.com. And there are a couple of creative and fun stand up ideas. They're all kind of remote friendly. So if you feel like doing something interesting, your next stand up, have a look.
Awesome. So everyone listening, check out funstandups.com to make those, boring stand-ups over Zoom, probably less boring. So definitely check that out. I also wanted to say thank you to more than the 3,000 of you who are now subscribed to our weekly interruption newsletter. We bring you articles from the community, inside information on weekly pods, and the first look at Interact 3.0. Super interesting, virtual conference to attend. It's on October 25th. If you haven't attended an Interact, definitely check that out. And as I've been saying, lastly, if you're into the conversation that we just had here, check out gitStream as a way to start creating that optionality, those lanes to accept changes for your engineers. And thank you again for coming on the show. It's been great to have
Thanks, Dan. Yeah, it's been fantastic.